accurately Don predicted the steps that would happen as the communist revolution moved through South Africa. So was Mandela different, though? To his credit, he began talking about reconciliation and forgiveness. When he was released from prison by President de Klerk, he showed unexpected statesmanship, counseling reconciliation rather than revenge. Obviously, he distanced himself from his wife, Winnie. Politically, he had to, given all the revelations that were coming out about what she had done in murdering other blacks. She was a liability. South Africa today. This is going to be the subject of part of the program, because when people come in with themes and ideas, whether it's wealth transfers and carbon tax for global warming, say, for example, or when other philosophies die, what we have found among the hardcore progressive socialists of the world is there is never repentance, never an I'm sorry for the damage and death that have been caused by the philosophy. They simply move on, and their compatriots in the media simply bury those things that are inconvenient and reform them, such as taking Yasser Arafat, another ally of Nelson Mandela, and transforming him into a peace partner. Western liberals got out of South Africa what they wanted, and then for the most part, they abandoned it. Today, South Africa is the murder capital of the world. Since Nelson Mandela came to office in 1994, 300,000 people have been murdered in a relatively small country. A woman is raped every 30 seconds, oftentimes by carriers of AIDS who go unpunished. Nelson Mandela did not oppose President Thabo Mbeki, his successor, for his really strange views on AIDS, which denied drugs to hundreds of thousands of Africans who had AIDS, allowing them to die. Now, had somebody else done this, had the apartheid regime done this to blacks or coloreds in South Africa, the world would have screamed for genocide trials. But when the African National Congress leadership did the same thing, the world looked away, very embarrassed, because it didn't match the narrative and it didn't match the myth. So having said what I have said about South Africa so far and what has taken us to these points, both good and bad, the real question is South Africa actually headed for something worse? Dr. Gregory Stanton, who's head of Genocide Watch last year, he is a man himself who fought against the apartheid system, he warned as early as last year that South Africa was stage 6 out of stage 8 on the road to genocide, the planning and preparation phase. Is that really true? And who will the victims then be? Joining me right now is Alex Newman. He's an international journalist, educator, and consultant. He generally lives in Europe. He's joining me right now from Florida, and he has written for numerous publications, including The New American. Alex, welcome up to the program. What do you see is happening right now in South Africa? Because I maintain that after Nelson Mandela was elected to office, the Western media just sort of dropped South Africa like it didn't exist and everything was just fine.
Yeah, well, they played such a key role in what happened there. I think they didn't want to stick around and see the fruits of their handiwork. If we look around South Africa today, you can make some arguments that some things have improved, but I suspect it's going to get a whole lot worse, and there are tensions growing, and poverty is spreading. As you mentioned before, Dr. Gregory Stanton is now warning of a genocide coming against the Afrikaners, the descendants of Europeans who started arriving 400 or 500 years ago. And then, of course, you have the whole communist element. Now we know for a fact that Mandela was on the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party. This was a Soviet-backed organization. This was backed by Mao Zedong in China, the biggest mass murderer in human history. These are not nice characters. And when you add the communist component to it, they always talked about this as a two-phase revolution. The first phase ending apartheid, the second phase enslaving the people under communist tyranny. And it looks like if powerful forces end up winning, that's where South Africa is going to be heading.
How is the party structure in South Africa today? African National Congress still in the driver's seat?
Yeah, they govern South Africa in a coalition. It's a formal alliance. It's known as the Tripartite Alliance, and it's the South African Communist Party, the ANC, which happens to be dominated by the South African Communist Party, which is much smaller, and this coalition of labor unions known as COSATU. It's kind of an umbrella group for different labor unions and big labor. So together, this coalition governs South Africa. It's very clear where all of this is headed. You have the president going on TV singing about the mass murder of whites at political rallies, at the ANC's most recent convention. Mandela used to do the same thing, although probably most people in the United States never saw that on their TV. You can just go to YouTube, you can watch Mandela singing about shoot the boar, kill the boar, bring me my machine gun, whatnot. So unless something changes, we're going to see some not so nice things happening in South Africa, and I suspect the media here in the United States won't show the slightest bit of interest in what's going on there.
As I said, after Mandela was elected, the word was peace, harmony, racial reconciliation have come to South Africa, or they're on a long, hard road, and then immediately the attention flowed elsewhere, and that was it. You know, that's aside from the movie Invicta that came out as part of Nelson Mandela's legacy, we really haven't heard too much about it. I think a lot of Americans would be surprised to hear some of this.
I think so too. You know, I lived in South Africa for a time, so I was familiar with some of this history. You know, a lot of people died in Mandela and the ANC's terrorist campaign that blew up a lot of civilians. You know, they mined farm roads and murdered farmers and their families. They blew up bombs in cities, the Church Street bombing. Mandela himself pled guilty to 156 acts of public violence. So just a part of history that's kind of been brushed aside. And I think now that we're seeing, you know, what's going to happen with all this, I don't think the media has shown any interest, and I don't think they will. I think Mandela will be buried. Things will probably continue to deteriorate, and the media will not cover it. They will not. I mean, it's almost like a taboo that you can't talk about what's going on in South Africa. It's sad because suddenly now they have democracy, so everything must be wonderful and flowers, and that's not the case. That's very obviously not the case. You can look at the statistics. You can go to South Africa. You can talk to South Africans. Blacks and whites are unhappy, as maybe some of your listeners might have seen when Jacob Zuma took to the stand. He was booed by his own people. So, you know, this isn't a harmonious, peace-loving, wonderful Marxist society. What we're seeing is very troubling indicators of bad things to come.
Alex Newman is my guest right now. He's an international journalist and consultant. He lives in Europe and has written articles for the Daily and for the New American. A long time ago, I had a guest on the program who said he had written a book on communism in Africa, and he made an interesting comment. The new communists are the ones, like you see at the United Nations, that talk very softly and very gently, like how could these people ever do anything very, very bad. He said they're very, very funny and very, very predictable. You could laugh at what it is they're doing because you can actually predict from their playbook how they're going to proceed. This is how dialectical stuff works. If it weren't for the horrible, horrible, horrible damage that they do, and it rests on a key issue, and the key issue is called deception. And that shows you whose father is theirs, the father of lies, because the core to any dialectical process is to always deceive people as to the outcomes towards which they are being steered. I want to read a couple of things from Don McIlvaney's MIA in 1990 and 1987 when we get back. We're at steelon.steel.com. I'm John Lufter. The program is Steel on Steel. I wanted to read a couple of paragraphs here from Don McIlvaney's intelligence advisor in 1990. He's actually quoting from himself the October 1987 issue. Welcome back to Steel on Steel. John Lufter here with you. As I've said over and over and over again, if you know what the dialectical and or Marxist playbook is all about, then everything's pretty predictable. The reason it works is so many people refuse to believe that it's actually in play. And as a matter of fact, the other side, the opposition, will ridicule anyone who points out that this is following a pretty standard playbook in order to conceal the ultimate outcome. That is the ultimate part of the essential nature of anything going on with dialectical processes is deception. You have to deceive the people or it doesn't work. And any kind of a change agent worth his salt will always try to avoid doing that at all costs. You can tell when they really start screaming and shouting. That's when you push them into a process of having to define their terms and state their intentions. If I did say welcome back to Steel on Steel. John Lufter here with you. In October of 1987, Don McIlvaney said this writer warned that when Mandela was released, one, the ANC would see it as a sign that the government is capitulating to the demands of radicals. Communist hammer and sickle flags will appear all over South Africa, accompanied by mass demonstrations. That happened. Two, Mandela will begin a triumphant tour around South Africa and will address huge crowds everywhere. pressure will grow for the unbanning of the African National Congress, which, by the way, the de Klerk government actually unbanned both the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party before Nelson Mandela was released, so it happened early. 3. Mandela will be brought by the political left and or the State Department to America for a Bash South Africa tour. He will appear on ABC's Nightline, on 60 Minutes, Meet the Press, and a host of other national television shows. He will be brought to the White House. He will address the United States Congress about the horrors of apartheid and the need to overthrow the South African government, and he may well address the United Nations and the British Parliament on the same subject. The global anti-South Africa juggernaut will be given a giant shot in the arm, and the global onslaught of momentum against South Africa will grow fivefold. 4. Mass demonstrations and huge crowds addressed by the communist revolutionary hero will precipitate violent clashes with the police, bloodshed, and deaths. These in turn will generate tremendous foreign pressure against the apartheid regime. 5. Moderate blacks will realize they are on the losing side, and they will either vanish from sight or join the apparent winners. Their alternative will be the dreaded necklace treatment. I already described that earlier in the program. 6. Just as the triumphant re-entry of Khomeini into Iran signaled to the Iranian masses the victory of the revolution, so Mandela's triumphant re-entry from prison and into the South African scene will signal to South Africa's black masses and to the world that the revolution has won. 7. Finally, under inordinate external as well as internal pressure, it is conceivable that, short of military intervention, the South African government will collapse and be replaced by a coalition government, thus marking the success of the first stage of the Marxist two-stage revolution. As I said, if you understand the playbooks, you can see that most everything played out according to that. And now the question I'm discussing with my guest right now is whether or not stage 2 of this whole process continues, regardless of the name under which we let it fly. Alex Newman's back with me here right now. If we look at the history of how this whole thing came about, those same things happen again today whenever we reach these issues. I mean, can we draw any greater parallels from this, Alex?
Yeah, I think you hit on some key points here, and one of those is that the communist strategists are very cunning, they're very clever, and they're very deceptive. Mandela denied until the day he died that he was a member of the Communist Party. Most people who study the issue knew that that was fake. I mean, just from the documents that were at his trial, we knew that that was fake. But now it's been officially admitted. The South African Communist Party said it, the ANC said it after his death, yes, he was a member of the Central Committee. So when people examine what communists are doing, they have to think in terms of long-term strategy. They have to realize that, they're communists. They don't believe in God. They don't subscribe to the same morality that traditional Western civilizations always held. So they lie, they deceive, and they murder. Communism has murdered, very conservative estimates, 100 million people in the last century, probably a lot more than that. So when people look at what's going on in South Africa, I think it's important that they understand the communist element, what's happening right now with the Afrikaners, the white descendants of the Dutch and the French. I think it's more of a means to an end than an end in itself. Maybe some of the people who are getting whipped up into this genocidal frenzy are, they truly hate whites, but I think the people behind the scenes, and those are the important ones, they see this as part of the road toward displacing Marxism, Leninism on South Africa, confiscating all the land from the farmers, nationalizing the mines, nationalizing the banks. And, we can see this in China as well. China is still governed by the Communist Party of China. Mao Zedong, biggest mass murderer of human history. But even they're starting to open up the market a little bit, right? So what's going on with this? Why do we see a little bit of capitalism allowed to flourish in China? Well, it goes back to what I was saying before. Communist strategy needs to be analyzed from the perspective of these people are highly deceitful. They don't have the same moral scruples that probably the vast majority of Americans do. So, we need to look at the fruits of what's happening and the fruits of these activities rather than their nice words.
The communists were really forced to open up a bit. They're trying to do this blend. You always hear about this blend between socialism and capitalism or something. There's never a blend. It's like oil and water. They don't mix. But right